For about 35 years, a phantom was moving along the backroads of America. He was hunting in the shadows, and he chose victims that he believed, the world just wouldn't miss. He was this killer, hiding in plain sight, like a ghost in the system. And for decades, nobody even knew he was out there. 93. Just let that number sink in for a second. 93. That's how many lives he claimed he took. And the story of how this ghost was finally captured, it's one of the most chilling in American history. And it's not just because of the crimes themselves, but because of how they were overlooked for so long. So our story actually starts not with the crimes, but with the capture. It's September 2012. Police get a lead on this guy who's wanted on a drug charge. They track him to a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky, and they arrest a 72-year-old man. His name? Samuel Little. And at the time, it just seemed like a totally routine bust. And, as part of that routine procedure, they took a DNA sample. It's just standard practice, right? They enter it into the national database, probably not expecting much of anything. But what came back was an absolute bombshell. Turns out, the DNA was a perfect match, but not for some recent crime. No, it was a match for evidence from 3 unsolved murders in Los Angeles all the way back in the 1980s. We're talking about 3 cold cases, just frozen for nearly 30 years, and all of a sudden, they had a name. And you have to remember, these weren't just files on a shelf. They were women, people. In 1987, there was Carolee Else First, found next to a dumpster. Then, that same year, Gurlis Apodaca, discovered in an abandoned auto shop. And in 1989, Audrey Nelson was left in a trash bin. All of them had been strangled. So Little gets extradited to LA, and he's charged. And of course, he denies everything, pleads his innocence. But that DNA, it was undeniable. So in 2014, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without parole. And for the justice system, you'd think, okay, case closed. But this was only the beginning. Okay, so fast forward a few years. It's May 2018, and this case pops up again, but in a totally unexpected place. There's this investigator in Texas, and he's just reviewing old cases. And he notices a familiar pattern in a 1994 murder of a woman named Denise Brothers in Odessa. The way she was killed, it felt eerily similar to those LA killings. And he starts to suspect a link to the man sitting in that California prison, Samuel. So this investigator, he actually travels to California to interview him. And what he finds is this frail 78-year-old man. He's got diabetes, heart disease, he's in a wheelchair. But this old man, he was holding on to a lifetime of secrets. Now, Little was constantly complaining about his prison. He hated it there, and he decided to use that as leverage. He makes the investigator this absolutely startling proposition. He says, "Get me transferred to a better facility in Texas, and I'll tell you everything. I will confess to every single murder I've ever committed." Well, the Texas authorities, they talk with the FBI, and they agree. They offer him the transfer. They even take the death penalty off the table in exchange for his complete cooperation. They sealed the deal. And in doing that, they basically unleashed a story that was darker than anyone could have possibly imagined. The moment that deal was signed, Little's entire demeanor just changed. He started talking, and he did not stop. We're talking for hundreds of hours. He just recounted murder after murder in states all across the country. He was remembering details that had been locked away for decades. He described his life as this nomad, right? Moving from city to city, preying on vulnerable people. And he said, and this is a direct quote, "Every place was like a grapevine. The girls were the grapes." It's just such a chilling insight into his mindset, isn't it? He literally saw women as just fruit to be picked and then thrown away. At one point, an investigator asked him what it felt like to kill. His reply, with just this chilling detachment, was, "I was in heaven, like sleeping with Marilyn Monroe." So for him, you see, the act of taking a life, it wasn't about anger or rage. It was all about absolute power and pleasure. His confessions, they just painted this horrifying map of death all across the country. Listen to this. New Orleans, 1982. He throws a woman's body in a river. Las Vegas, 1993. He rolls another one down a hillside. Arkansas, 1994. He leaves a victim in an empty field. He was literally everywhere, and yet nowhere. So in total, he confessed to 93 murders. 93 between 1970 and 2005. And his memory for faces, it was apparently photographic. So when he couldn't remember a victim's name, he would just pick up a pencil and draw her portrait from memory. He hoped the FBI could use the drawings to finally give these women their names back. And this all just leads to the central, really haunting question here, right? How? How did one man kill for 35 years without ever being caught? How did he become the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history while basically being a complete unknown? Well, the answer, tragically, lies in who his victims were. He deliberately targeted women on the absolute margins of society. We're talking about sex workers, drug users, transient women, and many of them were women of color. He preyed on people whose disappearance he gambled would barely cause a ripple. And he was strategic about it. He actually said once that if he killed a young white girl in a nice neighborhood, it would be all over the news. But his victims, he believed no one would miss them. And a lot of the time, he was right. See, because he strangled them, there weren't many obvious signs of violence. So their deaths were often misclassified by the authorities as accidental overdoses or natural causes. It was a massive systemic failure that gave him the perfect cover. You know, his own life began on those very same margins. Samuel Little was born in prison back in 1940. His mom was a teenager, and she later abandoned him on a dirt road. He was eventually found and then raised by his grandmother in a pretty poor neighborhood in Ohio. And from a really early age, he developed this dark, defining fixation. He claimed that after some kind of encounter with a teacher in kindergarten, he became obsessed with the human neck. And this one obsession, it would go on to define his entire life of violence. His life it quickly spiraled into crime. By the time he was 13, he was already in juvenile detention. And get this, before he committed his first known murder, he had already been arrested dozens of times across 11 different states for pretty much everything: theft, assault, fraud. He was just a career criminal drifting across the country. And that final transition from criminal to killer, it happened on New Year's Eve, 1970, down in Florida. He met a 33-year-old mother of two named Mary Broly. He took her to a remote swamp and he strangled her. Her body was found weeks later, but police couldn't figure out the cause of death. They never ruled it a homicide. And that taught Little a fatal lesson. He could get away with it. Samuel Little finally died in prison from his illnesses in December of 2020. He was 80 years old. By then, the FBI had confirmed his connection to over 60 murders, which officially made him the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States. So the killer is gone. But his story leaves us with this deeply unsettling question, because to this day, dozens of his victims are still unidentified. They only exist as faces in those haunting drawings he made. And it just forces us to ask, it's not just about who they were, it's about how many others like them are being overlooked right now, today, every single day.